Welcome back to my Graphic 45 Ghostly Greetings mini album tutorial. Today we are going to begin decorating page 1 with our Ghostly Greetings paper. Now in the build for page 1, I'd mentioned that this was the inspiration for my page, and I had just cut this right along those dots that were framing the piece. So this piece should be about 5.5, actually it's 5 3/8 of an inch wide and 5.5 inches long. I'm going to be adhering this right here to the top of the upper flap, making sure to leave that small border at the top and then on each side, just like this. Then I've taken my 8x8 spooky floral paper and I've cut a 2 1/4 inch strip off of my left side. Now from this 2 1/4 inch strip, I've cut a 3/8 inch strip off of the side here. And this piece is going to go here up against the side. Now when you put this here, it won't go any further to the right because all of those page edges where the flaps are will stop it. So you want to make sure that this is lined up straight with that, using these edges of my flap as a guide for placing this piece here. Now this piece is 1 7/8 of an inch. We're going to put this one here. So I've removed my photo mat from my pocket and I'm going to tuck this in here, just like this. Now, if you are using a slightly different die than mine, you want to be careful of your measurement. So I take my ruler for the lowest part, that's the point here on my pocket. I've extended this 1/8 of an inch past, that got me my 1 7/8 inch measurement. When I have that piece, I am going to make sure that I have my border around all 3 sides. Now I did trim these pieces to 7 inches. So this is 3/8 by 7, 1 7/8 by 7 inches. And I'm going to keep this piece because I'm going to use it for the rest of the page, but I am going to adhere these 3 pieces down to start. Once these papers are on, I'm actually going to open up to the inside. I will come back to the outside flap later. I've got my remaining piece of the spooky floral, that was the strip, and I've cut a piece to 2 3/4 by 5.5, and I'm going to place that piece here on this bottom flap, and I'm going to start it just below this score line. Since there will be that 1/8 of an inch gap here, if I set it just below that score line, it'll have 1/8 of an inch here and on each side, so it will have a uniform black border. Now I'm going to flip to my 3rd waterfall flap here. And I've got my cards. I've cut all of my cards apart and I've just cut them around that dotted line. This one is actually from the top of the paper, so it's got a little bit of extra paper above the actual, that gray border, but they're all about the same size. So if you just cut them down right around those borders, it'll be the same size. This one I'm going to put here on the front of this flap, and then from my spooky floral paper I have cut a piece here that this part is 5.5 inches, and then this one is 1 3/4. Then I've cut a 3/8 inch strip off the bottom that I'm going to place here. Once I have my 3/8 inch piece on, I've got my final piece. I had originally said that it was going to go here, and I forgot I was going to put this at the top of the flaps. So ignore this. Hopefully yours won't have it. It'll be covered, so it's not going to be a big deal. You will never see that. But this piece is going to go here at the top of the flap. So then the photo area is going to be here. So we'll have our 3/8 inch piece and then our remainder of our piece up here on the top. And then folding this down, I want to make sure that this does not stick and ruin my paper. Okay, folding this next flap down, I have the same thing. I have another piece of that paper, cut the same thing, 5.5 to 1 3/4. The bottom, I've cut a 3/8 inch piece off for this gap. And then this I have here for the top. And then I have my next card here for the front of this waterfall flap. Once those papers are on, I'm going to flip to the next waterfall flap. I'm going to put my final cut apart here on the front, and then from the last bit of my paper, I've cut this to 5.5 by 1 3/4, and I've cut my 3/8 inch piece off of the bottom for here. And then this piece I'm going to put here. Now, because there is that 1/8 inch gap again where that extra space is for this flap, I'm going to put this piece up against that score line, which will give me that 1/8 inch piece of black between these two papers. Now I'm going to be putting another piece here, but eventually I'm also going to be cutting from the second sheet of the same paper, that Spooky Florals. I've cut another piece to 5.5 by 1 inch, and it's going to go on the top of this flap here, but I'm going to need to place a magnet first, and I'm going to use my decorative edge. So I'm going to set this piece aside for now and come back to it. But for now, I'm going to adhere these 3 pieces down. Now I'm going to come back to my 5.5 inch by 1 inch piece from my second sheet of the 8 by 8 Spooky Florals. I'm going to use my decorative edge die on this piece just like I did with my cardstock. So I've got my die, and I am going to line it up on my grid first, and then I'm going to set my die right on top. I'm lining up this middle point with the center, and then these 2 pieces here with the top edge of my paper. The sides are straight, and I'm going to adhere this down. When you flip over, you'll see actually that the cutting edge is just below that edge. Now you can push this up a little bit if you really want to, but I just leave it like this. It'll give me a little tiny bit more of a gap than I would normally cut, but this is how I like to prepare my pieces. I find that that's the easiest, is just to line it up with the top edge. Now here's my piece, and before I pull it off, I'm going to show you, hopefully you can see. So my cut line here and here is not quite at the top. Now I could have pushed this die up a little bit more if I wanted to, but I find it easier just to line it up with the edge of my paper than it is to get that die right on the top, because sometimes it doesn't work quite the right way. Now it's going to go here, and then we're going to have room for a 4 inch photo mat here, but we do need to place a magnet there. So I'm going to remove this and take some double-sided tape, and I'm going to place it here. So I know that my piece, I've already marked where it's going to be. I want to make sure that my magnet is in the center of this. That way it's easier to cover with that paper. Once I have my magnet on my flap, I'm just going to go ahead and apply my adhesive like I normally would onto my piece. And then I am going to place this right down here on my paper. Now I'm lining everything up first, and then I'm going to press the paper around the magnet to make sure that it's adhered down to my flap. But until this paper grips, I'm just going to keep pressing it down around the magnet. You can use your bone folder as well to run that paper around, just to make sure everything is nice and flat. Then once I have my first magnet on, I'm going to put my second magnet on top of the paper. I'm going to take some double-sided tape here. Now I'm going to make sure that this bottom flap, all these flaps are closed. I'm going to make sure this bottom flap, that 1/8 inch piece, is sitting in the correct position. I'm going to make sure that this 1/8 inch piece is sitting correctly. And then I'm going to make sure the sides are lined up, then press that magnet down so that the magnet is in the correct position on the front of this lower flap. Next, I'm going to take my 8.5 by 11 black spiderweb patterns and solids. And I have cut this piece here to 5.5 by 3 3/4. Then I've cut 1 inch off of the bottom part. And it doesn't matter if it's the bottom or top since this paper doesn't really have a direction, so to speak. This piece here, 5.5 by 2 3/4, is going to go right here on the front of this flap to cover my magnet. Then for this other piece, I've got this to go here on my front little bottom portion, but since I have that flap with the decorative edge, I need to use the decorative edge on my paper. So I am going to do what I just did with the other piece, and I'm going to center this piece on here and then run this through my die cutting machine and adhere it here with a small black gap between this paper and then the decorative paper here. I did make a mistake with the measurement, so a 1 inch piece with the decorative edge was a little bit too large. So I cut probably about 1/8 of an inch off of the straight part of my piece so that it can fit here and still have that small border. Once I have these two pieces on, I'm going to go ahead and come inside here. So for my 4 flaps, I've got this piece here. I've got my orange patterns and solids. I'm going to be using the orange solid side. Now I've cut 4 pieces here. So I just cut 1 strip down that was 5.5 by 12 inches. Then I've cut it into 3 pieces that are 4 inches. And then I've cut a second piece over here that measures 5.5 by 4 inches. And these pieces are going to go in here with a small border between the pieces. Same thing for here. On the rest of them, they're going to go towards the bottom of the flap with an equal space between the paper and the bottom of the flap here. And then the same thing here. And then finally on this one, I'm going to place it here on the bottom. And I forgot to do this before, so I've just cut another piece from my 8x8 spooky floral paper, and this is 5.5 by 1 3/8. It's going to go here at the top to match the other flaps. Once my orange papers are on, I'm going to come down here. I have my black spiderweb patterns and solids paper again. I'm cutting to 5.5 by 5 5/8. This piece will go here. I'm going to be lining the edges up with the orange paper and then the paper on the bottom flap so that everything is nice and straight. And then for over here, I've cut another piece of that same paper, and this piece measures 1/2 inch by 7 inches. Then I did take my border die, and instead of putting the point facing out on this one, I took the point and I have the point facing in on that right edge. So I've lined up these side pieces here to mimic the pocket curve. And I'm going to be adhering this piece on, and this piece is going to go right up against the edge of where those flaps are, which will then give me that space between here and then that border here. Once these papers are on, I'm going to go ahead and close the first 3 flaps and then close up the page. Later, I'm going to come back with my ephemera assortment or my stickers and add some embellishments to my pages, but for right now, I'm just going to work on decorating the base pages. The same thing with my photo mats. I like to do those last. That way I know that I have enough paper left over at the end that I can do those things, but I want to make sure that my pages are completely covered before I do that, because I can always piece together papers for my photo mats. So for now, this is how I'm going to leave the front of page 1. And we're going to then flip over and work on the back side. The first piece for the back side is from the 12 by 12 papers. It's the Sit for a Spell piece. I've cut from this left corner 5 1/4 by 7 inches. It's going to go here on this flap, so I need to take my decorative edge die to the left side of my flap. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'm going to adhere it down to the front of this right hand flap. Once this paper is on, I'm going to open up and place a magnet here. Now I know I'm going to be placing 4-inch photo mats here, so I'm just going to mark where 4 inches is from that edge so that I know the amount of space that I have to place my magnet. I'm going to take some double-sided tape and place it here in the center between my point here and this mark where my 4 inches is. And I'm going to go ahead and place my magnet and then make sure that it will actually correctly adhere to my flap on the other side. So once I have that first magnet on, I will take my second magnet and apply it and some adhesive. Then I'm going to close this, and it is in a good position. I could actually make this one go a little bit closer so that I have more room here, but I'll just have to be careful with this one. And then once I have my magnet there, I'm going to take the remaining piece of my Ghostly Greetings Nightscape Black Patterns in Solids paper. This is what I had left over from the cover, and I've cut my piece from here 4 1/4 by 7 inches. And then I will take my edge die and I'm going to use it here on my right edge of my piece, and then I'm going to adhere it here to the front of this flap. Now I am going to add some decoration to match this here, and I've got this strip here. This is one of the pieces that was one of the borders when I cut apart my bigger cards from my 12 by 12 sheet. So it looked like this, and it had these borders on it. So I've got those that I've trimmed off, and I have one of the shorter ones that I'm going to use here. And I am just going to measure this to 7 inches, and I'm going to adhere it down here just to give it a little bit of color to go with this. Now you could add it into the center if you like the look of that, but I'm going to just put mine off to the side here, just like this. Moving on to the inside of the page, I have the 8 by 8 Boo to You paper here, and I have cut this piece to, I have 2 of them that are 3 1/4 by 7 inches. I'm going to place this half here and this half here, tucking just slightly underneath my belly band, and then having these come right up towards the score line on each side. So there is a nice uniform border around the entire piece. And then this is my card that goes to the front. I had mentioned this previously. This is from the Ghostly Greetings main paper that was the inspiration behind starting this page, and I'm just going to adhere it straight down to the front of my card. Next, I'm going to actually come over here and do these pieces for the sides. I have my remaining piece that I had from my 8 1/2 by 11 Patterns in Solids, the spider web that we'd used for the front side of the page, and I'm going to be using this portion here. Now I'm going to be showing you this specifically because I need this entire piece here intact for another cut. So I have cut these 2 pieces from the bottom of this. They are each 1 1/4 inches, so I've cut 2 1/2 inches by 7 inches. And then I've cut these to 2 pieces that measure 1 1/4 by 7. I'm going to use the edge die on the right side of this edge for over here and the left side of this edge for over here, but I need to make sure that I save this piece here, and I'm going to come back and cut that next. So here are my 2 pieces, and I am just going to set these in place for now, but I'm not going to glue them down. For the photo mats, I've got my green 8 1/2 by 11 Patterns in Solids that I have cut like this. So I've cut 4 inches by 9 inches that I've then cut into 3 3-inch pieces. And then from over here, this is 4 1/2 by 3 1/2. And I have 2 of these pieces. I'm going to be using 2 of these one at the top, lining up with the top edge of this paper, one at the bottom, lining up with the bottom edge of this paper. It's going to go a little bit closer to that score line of the flap. That way I have a little bit of a black gap between my papers here. If yours does not have enough of a gap, you can always slightly trim the edge here. Then I'm going to take this one and I'm going to place it over here in the center. So I will actually measure this so that it's in the center and place this one here, again, up towards the score line a little bit closer. That way I have enough space here for a small black gap between these two pieces of paper, trimming that if needed. Now, if you want to wait to see the papers that I'm going to be putting here before you add anything on with glue, you can do that, or you can go ahead and adhere these pieces down. These pieces are actually going to go in here in just a minute, and then I'm going to add some decorations later. So if you want to add these papers, they just go right into this card, just like that. Now from that remaining spiderweb paper, I have cut a piece to 1 3/4 by 2 1/4, and then I've cut this to 1 1/8. I'm going to place one piece here and one piece here on the belly band. I'm taking my 12 by 12 Ghostly Greetings paper. I have cut the border strip off of the side. I just cut along the green. And then I cut a piece to 6 inches in length. Now I trimmed the little orange piece off the top, and then I also trimmed a little bit off of the green. So this is about 1 3/8 of an inch. I'm going to take one of the pieces and leave it as it is here. But when I do this, that's a lot of green here. So what I'm going to do with this one is I am going to take the green part. I'm going to just cut this off. I'm going to put this here like this, and I'm just going to reattach it together at the top, just like that. And then I've taken a 4-inch piece and I've just cut the all treats no tricks piece. I've cut the green spider piece off and trimmed this so that it will fit in here, just like that. So I'm going to now just add my photo mat back in here, and then I will come back and decorate that at the end of the tutorial series. Now I'm going to just make sure that this is sitting flat. And the last thing I'm going to do is add this here on the front as a tuck spot for my journaling card to sit in like this. So I'm just going to put the piece directly on top of the pumpkin that was on the page, on the paper. That's why I picked that part of the paper. And I'm just applying adhesive here. So to that corner where the hat is, and then around that curve. And I'll just set this exactly where I see it on the page. And then the journaling card, the Sit for a Spell journaling card, is from the 12 by 12 papers. Now, obviously, you don't have to put the journaling card on here if you don't want to, or you can put the smaller one from the 8 by 8 paper if you would prefer it to be a little bit smaller. You can turn it around this direction if you want it to blend a little bit more. But I'm going to leave mine just like this. I'm actually going to wait until this dries fully before I put it in there. But that is going to be all for the page for now. Obviously, I am going to come back at the end after everything is done, and I'll add the decorations to the photo mats, and I will probably add some additional embellishments, but I like to do that after all of my pages are done so that I can also put it in the book to see how much room I have for the different elements and things like that. So I will come back to this in a completely separate tutorial. So that's all for this one. If you are following along, let me know what you think of these pages so far. And if you have any questions, obviously, please feel free to leave me a comment below. I'll see you in the next tutorial.